Hello guys, before the story starts, I want to tell you that my previous channel has been hacked and this is my new channel. Please support and subscribe this channel. Let's start the story. Daisy wanted to win. She wanted to have the last word without even realizing how much damage it would cause. She said it. "You argue a lot to be a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there." The second those words left her mouth, the entire room changed. What happened next was heartbreaking. Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. Daisy and Raymond had been married for years. To most people, they looked like a regular couple, going to work, coming home, eating dinner together, and living what seemed like a normal life. If you ask their friends or neighbors, they'd say they were doing just fine. But what no one saw was what happened behind closed doors, the little things that slowly chipped away at their relationship. Their marriage wasn't bad, but it wasn't great either. It was filled with small fights. Never anything huge, but just enough to leave a bad taste in their mouths. Disagreements that didn't get solved were just pushed aside. Sarcastic jabs that felt like jokes on the surface, but carried something heavier underneath. Over time, these moments piled up, turning into unspoken resentments. The warmth between them had faded, replaced with a quiet tension that followed them through the house like a shadow. Raymond had always been the confident one, the kind of man who never seemed bothered by anything. He spoke with certainty, walked with his head held high, and never let people see when something got to him. At least that's what Daisy believed. She had never once thought of him as insecure, never imagined that there was something buried beneath that strong exterior. But Raymond had a secret, a deep personal insecurity that had followed him since he was a teenager. Something that had been whispered about behind his back. Something he had tried to forget but never could. It wasn't something he talked about, not even with Daisy, and in all their years of marriage, she had never realized how much it mattered. That was until one night in the middle of yet another argument, she let her frustration get the best of her. She didn't think before she spoke. She didn't weigh the words before throwing them at him, and when they left her mouth, she could never take them back. She had no idea that one careless remark would change everything. It had been one of those evenings, tense, exhausting, and filled with that unspoken irritation that had become a normal part of their marriage. Raymond was frustrated. Daisy was tired. The argument escalated quickly, turning into yet another shouting match where neither of them really listened to the other. It was one of those fights where both people felt cornered, where it was less about solving the issue and more about winning. And in that moment, Daisy wanted to win. She wanted to have the last word. She wanted to make sure he knew how fed up she was. And so without thinking, without even realizing how much damage it would cause, she said it. "You argue a lot to be a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there." The second those words left her mouth, the entire room changed. The anger disappeared, but not in the way she expected. Raymond didn't yell. He didn't argue back. He didn't throw an insult at her like he normally would. He just stopped. His expression froze in place. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched slightly at his sides. And for the first time in their marriage, Daisy saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just frustration. It was something much worse. Pain, betrayal, humiliation. The kind of look that told her she had just hit a part of him that she wasn't supposed to touch. A place so deeply hidden that even she, his wife, had never truly seen it before. Then without saying a single word, Raymond turned and walked away. Daisy stood there waiting for him to come back, waiting for him to yell, to argue, to fight back the way he always did, but he never did. And that silence, that was so much worse than anything else he could have said. Now, if you've ever been in a relationship, you know how fights usually go. There's anger, there's shouting, and maybe someone storms off. But after some time, whether it's minutes or hours, you come back together. You talk or at least acknowledge each other. But this time was different. That night, Raymond never came back to their bedroom. At first, Daisy didn't think much of it. She figured he just needed some time to cool off, that he was angry and wanted to be alone for the night. Maybe he would come back in the middle of the night when she was asleep, or maybe he just needed a few hours to clear his head. Either way, she wasn't too worried. But when she woke up the next morning and reached for him, The other side of the bed was still empty. That's when an uneasy, unfamiliar feeling settled over her. Raymond had never done this before. He had never just left. Even after their worst fights, he would still sleep in their bed. Maybe with his back turned, maybe with a wall of tension between them. But he was always there. She got up and searched the house, expecting to find him in the kitchen or maybe on the couch. But when she found him in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed, something fell off. He wasn't packing. He wasn't pacing angrily or even looking frustrated. He just sat there motionless, detached, like something inside him had shut down completely. Daisy stood in the doorway, waiting for him to say something. He didn't, so she spoke first. Raymond, nothing. Why are you sleeping in here? Still nothing. She tried again, pressing for an answer, asking if he was still mad and if he was going to come back to bed. But he barely even looked at her. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't to argue. It wasn't to tell her how much she hurt him. It was just silence. His pain was loud enough. Days passed and nothing changed. At first, Daisy told herself that it was just a phase and that he would snap out of it. She went about her days as normally as she could, convincing herself that he would get over it. But he didn't. Raymond avoided her at every opportunity. If she walked into a room, he left. If she tried to start a conversation, he gave her nothing. If she reached out to touch him, he pulled away. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper. It was like he had erased her from his life without even saying a word. Daisy tried to fix it in the way she knew how. She made his favorite meals, hoping the smell of home-cooked food would soften him. He barely touched his plate. She tried to joke to lighten the mood, but he didn't laugh. She even tried to be affectionate, reaching for his hand or brushing against him when they passed each other, but he stiffened at her touch. Nothing worked. And that's when she realized something terrifying. For years, she thought that fighting meant there was still something to fight for, that as long as they were arguing, they still cared enough to be angry. But now there was nothing. And that silence, it was worse than any screaming match they had ever had because it felt like something between them had already died. See, what Daisy didn't realize was that her words didn't just hurt him in the moment. They didn't just embarrass him or bruise his ego. What she said had ripped open a wound that had been there long before she ever met him, a wound he had spent years trying to forget. Raymond had always been self-conscious about his size. It wasn't something he talked about, not even with his closest friends. But growing up, he had always felt like he wasn't enough. He remembered the jokes, the teasing, the whispers behind his back. In high school, a rumor had spread about him. Something a locker room conversation had started. Something that wasn't even true, but it didn't matter. It reached the wrong person, the girl he had a crush on. He still remembered the way she had looked at him afterward. Not with anger, not even with pity. Just indifference, like she didn't even see him anymore. That moment stuck with him. Even as he grew older, those insecurities didn't just fade away. He carried them into his relationships. At first, he thought they didn't matter until the day they did. His last serious girlfriend had cheated on him. He had walked in on the betrayal, and when he demanded to know why, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't even try to lie. She just shrugged and told him the truth in the cruelest way possible. You can't satisfy me. That was the moment that destroyed him. That was the moment he learned to bury his insecurities so deep that no one would ever see them again. He never talked about it, never let anyone get close enough to that part of him. He built himself up, carried himself with confidence, and convinced himself that he was stronger than in the past. And then he met Daisy. She was different. She didn't make him feel small, didn't make him feel like he had to prove anything. With her, he felt safe, loved. For the first time, he didn't have to worry about the things that used to haunt him. He told himself that she saw him for who he was, that what he had been through didn't matter anymore. Until that night, until she threw those words in his face. You argue a lot to be a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there. That one sentence took him back to the laughter in high school, back to the betrayal in his last relationship, back to every moment he had spent trying to convince himself that he was more than what people said about him. And the worst part, it wasn't coming from a stranger this time. It wasn't coming from some girl in high school or a cheating ex. It was coming from Daisy, the one person he thought would never say something like that. And now, for the first time in their marriage, he wasn't sure if he could ever look at her the same way again. He wonders if she is already cheating. Daisy reached her breaking point one evening. She realized that while she had been waiting for things to go back to normal, it seemed to get worse. That night, she walked into the guest room to talk to him and apologize, expecting to see him sitting on the bed, scrolling through his phone like he had been for weeks. But the room was empty. The shower was running in the bathroom, and his phone sat on the bed, its screen still lit. Daisy had never been the type to go through his phone. Even now she hesitated, but she told herself she would just take a quick look. She didn't even do much before she saw an email notification from the notification bar. Subject: regarding divorce proceedings. Her heart stopped. She stared at the screen, her breath shallow, her mind racing. Divorce? Divorce? Number, this had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. She wanted to believe that, but deep down she knew better. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't just about what she had said that night. Raymond wasn't just angry. He wasn't just punishing her with silence. He was preparing to leave her. A wave of panic crashed over her. Her hands trembled as she set the phone back down. She backed away from the bed, her body tense with emotions she couldn't even name. That night, she couldn't stay quiet any longer. She had to know. When he came out of the bathroom, she was already waiting. Her heart pounded as she asked, "Are you really thinking about divorcing me over one argument?" For the first time in weeks, he looked at her. But it wasn't with anger. It wasn't even with sadness. It was with nothing. His voice was eerily calm when he finally spoke. "You think this is just about that night?" And that was the moment Daisy realized. This wasn't just about the insult. It wasn't just about the words she had thrown at him. This was about everything. The unresolved fights, the emotional distance, the wounds they had ignored for too long. Her words at night. They weren't the reason he was leaving. They were just the final straw. Daisy had made a mistake. She knew that. She had hurt him in a way she never imagined possible. And now she was desperate to fix what she had broken. And for the first time, Daisy was faced with a terrifying question. What if she had already lost him? She tried everything. She apologized over and over again, not just with words, but with actions. She tried to reach him to remind him of the life they had built together. She made his favorite meals, left notes for him, and even tried to get him to talk about anything. Work, the weather, something light. But no matter what she did, he remained distant. He would answer her questions with short, empty responses. A nod, a shrug, a quiet "I don't know." But that was the thing. She could feel that he did know. He knew whether or not he still wanted to be here, and she was afraid that his silence was his answer. Daisy had always believed that regret was something you could fix, that as long as you were willing to make things right, you could undo the damage. But this was different. This was the kind of regret that no amount of effort could erase. And Raymond, he had already started pulling away, and all Daisy could do was watch as he drifted further and further away, wondering if there was anything left to hold on to. And then one evening, she had walked past the guest room, barely paying attention, until something made her stop. Raymond was standing next to the bed. A suitcase sat open in front of him. His clothes were folded neatly inside. He was packing. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. He was really leaving. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She stepped into the room, barely able to find her voice. When she did, it was barely above a whisper. "Are you really leaving?" Raymond sighed, his shoulders rising and falling with the weight of something heavier than just exhaustion. He didn't look at her right away. He just stood there for a moment, hands gripping the edge of the suitcase like he was grounding himself. Finally, he turned to face her. "I don't know if I can get past this." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She had prepared herself for anger, for an argument, for him to finally let out all the things he had been holding back. But this calm, quiet uncertainty, it was so much worse because this wasn't him trying to hurt her. This was him telling the truth. Tears welled in her eyes, streaming down her face before she could stop them. She didn't care. She didn't care about pride or dignity or anything else. She just knew that she wasn't ready to let him go. "I love you," her voice cracked. "I messed up. I would take it back if I could, but I can't. Just tell me what to do." For the first time in weeks, she saw something shift in his expression. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just stood there staring at her as if trying to decide if there was still something left between them. Then finally he spoke. "You can't take back what you said." His voice was quiet but firm, and I can unhear it. "But maybe I don't want to walk away. Not yet." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. But it was something. And right now, that was all Daisy had left to hold on to. Raymond didn't leave that night, but the damage remained. The road to healing would be long, and Daisy knew that some wounds couldn't be erased overnight. The real question was, could their love survive? So what do you think? Can a marriage survive something like this? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. Until next time.